Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jessica Ash for those of you that are new, both a functional nutritionist and a hormone nerd. I love connecting biological truths and education about your metabolism in an easy to understand way that you can actually implement into your daily life. If you like what I talk about in my videos, remember that my online course, Fully Nourished, is a blueprint to restoring your metabolism and balancing your hormones using nutrition. And all the principles I talk about in my content, both on my Instagram at Jessica Ash Wellness and here, is kind of just an extension of the foundations I teach in that course. And it's always available in the description box below. So today we're actually going to dive a little bit more into the science of fat loss. This is our second video in the Hormonally Respectful Fat Loss series. If you didn't catch our first video, make sure to watch that first, really talking about fat loss mindset and what hormonally respectful fat loss is. Today, we're actually going to dive a little bit more into the science behind everything. What actually happens when you lose fat, when you're ready to lose fat, and when is actually the time to start focusing on losing fat. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comments below or just comment your thoughts, and make sure to like and subscribe if you really like this content. But let's dive in. So throughout this video, I'm gonna be referencing something called the metabolic markers. And if you're not really new to eating for your metabolism or eating pro-metabolic, then you're probably familiar with what metabolic markers are. And if you're not, metabolic markers are really just your body's signs that your metabolism and your cells are functioning optimally. So this is really everything from our body temperatures and our pulses to, how we're sleeping at night, our mood, our energy, our libido, our periods. If we're ovulating or not, how is our hair, skin, and nails? How hard do we have to work to stay at a stable and healthy weight? How do we recover from a workout? Those are kind of what we call metabolic markers, our blood sugar control. And if you want to learn more about your metabolic markers and checking in with your metabolism, make sure to check out my free temps and pulses and metabolism check-in training in the description box below if you haven't already taken it. It's a lot of people really like it, and it kind of gives you that really foundational knowledge you need to just kind of understand a little bit more about metabolic markers, specifically like temperatures and pulses, but really all the signs of a healthy functioning metabolism. So when I reference metabolic markers, I'm talking about just like your body's signs that it's doing well, and then also like your physical signs that you're doing well. And then I will also be referencing macros a lot throughout, and because this is also already gonna be such an in-depth video, it's probably a good idea for you to go watch my video dedicated to talking about macros if you have any more questions about macros, just because I won't be able to dive into them too deeply in this specific video. But for basic understanding, remember macros are our three main macronutrients: protein, carbs, and fats, and they all have purposes, right? And they all work together in balance to really help our bodies achieve balance. But to get started today, I really want to dive into what is fat loss, because a lot of us are so confused. We've been taught or educated about fat from marketing companies and from people trying to sell us things and from people on social media. We actually don't really know what fat loss is. We kind of see our fat as this nasty part of ourselves, or we look at our rolls with disdain, and we just think ew, I just want to get rid of it, and it's you actually don't get rid of your fat cells. They don't actually go anywhere. But your fat cells do increase and decrease in size. I kind of like to think of them as storage containers. So, imagine you have your kitchen and what you cook on a regular basis to feed yourself for your immediate meal. Let's say you're cooking lunch, but then in your pantry you have all these storage containers, and they have room for you to add to those storage containers. And so maybe let's say you're prepping for the apocalypse, you can cook your lunch to eat right now, but you're going to cook a little extra lunch and put it in the storage container for later. And that's how I like to kind of think of our fat cells. They can actually increase to 10 times their size, and they can really expand to hold all types of things. They really like to hold free fatty acids, which we would consider as fats, the fat in our diet, but they can also hold glucose, and then the body will also store toxins like metals and hormones like estrogen, or even environmental toxins that we're sometimes exposed to. if it doesn't have the capacity to deal with those things at the moment, or doesn't want to deal with those things, the fat cells are actually a pretty safe place to put those things to deal with later. And that's important to remember is, when we're trying to lose fat, we're not actually trying to lose fat. We're trying to open up those fat cells and use what's inside of them, or detoxify what's inside of them, or metabolize what's inside of them, so the fat cells begin to shrink. That's actually how you lose fat. And so, although losing fat is about giving your body an incentive to tap into the fat stores and use what's inside of them, it's more than just calories in, calories out. Although that's a big part of it, right? We don't want to be intaking more energy, which is just what a calorie is, a unit of energy. We don't want to be intaking more units of energy than our body can use. There are many things that are going to dictate how our body uses that energy, correct? And it's really about finding balance between our use of energy and our intake of energy. And healing your metabolism, or restoring your metabolism, is really about actually increasing and optimizing your use of energy by optimizing your nutrients and your hormones. Because, the people that will argue that all calories are created equal, that's just not true. 100 calories of a prepackaged cookie is going to hit a lot different than 100 calories of a potato. And that's just facts. It's going to provide different nutrients. It's going to provide, the gut is going to process it very differently, depending on the ingredients, and also the types of sugars and starches found inside of those things. Additives in the cookies might affect how your body absorbs and assimilates those calories differently than the potato. So there are many factors, and calories in, calories out is not the whole story. But, of course, when it comes to losing fat, we also do need to give our body an incentive to tap into the fat cells. Minerals and hormones are going to really dictate a lot of our use of energy, or a lot of how our body uses energy. And our food, which is going to, provide nutrients, the micronutrients, the minerals, the macronutrients, is really going to tell our body a lot of information about our environment. And then what our body's going to do is take that input and take that data, and our central nervous system, aka our brain and our nervous system, is going to really speak to our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland to really dictate all the hormones in our body, to kind of tell the cells what type of environment we're living in. And it will dictate where fuel goes and how fuel gets used accordingly. This is why somebody, let's say, that starts to develop a thyroid issue, they could be eating the same types of foods, the same amount of calories, and yet all of a sudden they start putting on a bunch of weight in places that they never had fat storage before. And the reason is because the body has actually slowed down its use of energy in certain cells, so that some of that energy could actually go into the fat cells. And this is actually how the body prepares for keeping itself safe in times of stress or famine. And that's what we have to think about excessive fat loss as. The body can actually be simultaneously starving in certain places while pushing fuel into the fat stores. And this is where we have to really understand that extra storage of fat in places that we maybe don't want it still serves a purpose, and there's a reason why the body is doing it. And when we start to demonize fat or see it as the enemy, we've really lost our grip or our handle on this idea. And so we have to really go rewind and bring ourselves back to reality, or back to the facts, is that the body does everything it does for a very specific reason, and even fat storage is often for our safety. And so most people who have yo-yo dieted their whole lives are not using energy well because their body does not feel safe. It has never experienced any type of consistency before. It has never experienced any type of safety. It's only been completely gone through periods of being safe or not safe, and no consistency in regards to nutrients or calories or sleep or exercise or sunlight. The body has no consistency. And so many people, and I'm going to really lump anyone who's hormonally imbalanced into this category. It doesn't matter if you feel like you're significantly overweight, or maybe you're underweight, or you've never struggled with your weight but you have other hormonal issues. It really boils down to safety. And everyone's genetics is going to maybe express this imbalance or the body not feeling safe in a specific way. But in reality, a lot of people who are storing a lot of fat or are significantly overweight are still not using energy well. They don't necessarily have an excess of energy for their heart cells or their liver cells or their digestion cells. They just have excess energy stored in their fat cells. And this is why I really want to bring up a very important point. I've seen a lot of people, because I often talk about under eating or inconsistent eating, but people will say like, well, what about me? What if I'm an overeater and an under exerciser? And I like to really, first of all, I don't like when people talk about themselves like that. I feel like it's like really mean. But also, I want to bring light to the fact that there's probably times where people who consider themselves overeaters are under eating. And I would like to kind of categorize people more as an inconsistent eater. Being overweight is often not an overeating issue. It's usually an inconsistent eating issue. Many people who are overweight are actually simultaneously starving while pushing most of their much needed fuel into their fat stores. And if you're like, whoa, I don't like the way this sounds, like, if you're overweight, you're overeating, and that's just the bottom line. I want you to get real with yourself. Whether you're someone who's overweight or you're thinking about someone in your life who's super overweight, have you or the person you're thinking of ever provided your body with high quality, consistent fuel on a regular basis, including enough protein, carbohydrates from high quality sources, and fats from high quality sources? Have you moved your body regularly and prioritized your sleep on a very consistent long-term basis? And most people are like, no, of course not. And there you go. You need to get real with yourself. You probably have gone through periods where you maybe are overeating because you're starving. Your cells are starving because you went through periods of inconsistent eating or under eating. And so a lot of people are flitting from this like severely under eating to then severely overeating. And it's really just not about the under eating or the overeating. It's about the inconsistent eating. But the problem is, and the main problem of this is that the body has never, ever felt safe. It has never felt safe enough to stop pushing fuel into storage and to start actually utilizing that fuel well. And the interesting thing about people who are very hesitant to start eating for their metabolism or pro-metabolic eating is they're always like, oh, I'm so afraid to gain any weight. But it's interesting that most people that are afraid to gain weight initially aren't afraid to start a fad diet that they know they're gonna put that weight back on, but as long as they're promised an immediate weight loss or fat loss or movement on the scale, they don't care about the long-term consequences. Why? Because it's a mindset thing as much as a physical thing. And so I need you guys to take a step back and say, if I knew that I was going to put on a couple pounds, but then long-term be able to lose it, does it really matter that I have to put on a couple pounds? It's totally a mindset shift. So, a lot of people who have struggled with their weight their whole life or felt like they are, they tend to be significantly overweight, it often becomes a lifelong goal to just lose that weight, and nothing else matters, including nourishing themselves or taking care of their body, and it really becomes this lifelong war with the body. And I just want to encourage you that as you dive into, restoring your metabolism and balancing your hormones, you are no less worthy of focusing on your body and caring for your health, even if you have significant amounts of fat to lose. That doesn't make you less worthy. It might take you a little bit more time to get where you want to go. I always like to remind people, like, how long have you been struggling already? A lot of people who are significantly overweight have already done so many fad diets where they lose some of the fat and then they gain it all back and more. And then they lose some of the fat and they gain it all back and more. Because what they're doing in the process is they already had metabolic problems, and then it's just making it worse and worse. And at what point do we need to say, like, enough is enough? Like, enough is enough, So I just want to remind you guys that even if you're significantly overweight or not, all of this information applies to you. It doesn't put you into a very special or particular box. All of these particular points apply to you no matter what. So now that we've got that being overweight is not necessarily an overeating issue, but an inconsistency issue, I want to bring another point before we really dive into the meat of this video. And I want to bring this point up for you. And that's that true healthy fat loss that lasts and is sustainable needs to be slow. No ifs, no ands, no buts. It has to be slow. And here's why. Because fat loss is stressful to the body. I repeat, fat loss is stressful to the body. when you open up those fat cells and use what's inside, not only does that require your cells to have some level of functioning, but you also have to be detoxifying well, eliminating your waste well. There needs to be some type of resilience to the stress that's going to come from opening up something that has maybe been there for a very long time. It's kind of like going into your attic and opening up the boxes. Like, you don't know what you're gonna get. You really don't. And the process of burning fat, or, opening up fat cells, which is really what burning fat is really allowing free fatty acids, or whatever else is in the fat cells. I said, glucose can be in there, hormones, toxins, other things can be in there as well, but primarily our body likes to store free fatty acids. When those start to release into the bloodstream, they can cause some inflammation, especially if they're poor quality fats. So if you're familiar with my work, I talk about how the quality of fats we eat is everything, right? Saturated fats that don't oxidize and are kind of a little bit more resilient to light and heat. They're our body's preferred source of cell stability. A lot of times when we eat saturated fats, our body actually uses them pretty much right away to repair the membrane of the cell and to make hormones. And, our body does use some, unsaturated fats, but a majority of them actually do get pushed into the fat cells. And if we have grown up eating tons and tons of, canola oil and soybean oil and these poor quality polyunsaturated fatty acids, those are going to be primarily what's stored in our fats. Maybe some monounsaturated fats, but probably mostly PUFAs. And the problem with this is as we start to open up those fat cells, those PUFAs are going to be released, right? Those free fatty acids are going to be released into the bloodstream. And polyunsaturated fats can cause stress, and they can kind of suppress the metabolism a little bit. But that doesn't mean that your body can't handle those things. It is going to cause a little bit more lipid peroxidation, maybe some inflammation. But again, if we have laid a solid foundation, our body will be able to handle the metabolic suppression a little bit. But it actually takes energy to burn energy. It actually takes energy to burn fat, and because fats burn on the flame of carbohydrate. And so, when attempting to open up those fat stores and all we want to do is burn fat, we have to remember that fat loss is stressful. And we can't demonize all fat, because all of us have a little bit of body fat. I have body fat right here, kind of a protective layer in between my skin and my muscle. I have some, on my belly, definitely protecting my reproductive organs, a lot more there, on my hips and my thighs. There are reasons why women store fat at different seasons of their life. And for women, since our seasons often change dramatically, when we go through puberty, our hormones completely shift. And then as we kind of enter our childbearing years, we definitely see our hormones shifting a little bit more. And then pregnant women often tend to store fat a little bit differently than breastfeeding women. And breastfeeding women are storing fat for the purpose of feeding their child. And then, a woman that's not pregnant or breastfeeding is going to store fat a little bit differently. So it's really important to remember that body fat does serve a purpose. It's very protective, it provides fuel, and throughout seasons of life, our body's gonna kind of shift and change based on what season we're in. And so you have to kind of keep that in your mind, that context in your mind, before you just try to attempt to tap into your fat stores. There are times when it's appropriate, and there's times when it's really not appropriate. And I know this is not what we like to hear, but like I talked about in the last video, there are seasons for building, and then there are seasons for changing and shifting things. There are seasons for balancing and seasons for causing growth and change, and they don't always coincide with one another. You can do both, but sometimes you can't do them both at the same time. And so please be using discretion when you attempt fat loss. It's not always an appropriate time to do that. But if you're like, it's an appropriate time for me, I'm ready to kind of listen to more about when it's appropriate, then stay for the rest of this video, because that's what we're going to dive into. Because really, when it comes down to losing fat or tapping into our fat stores, we need to give our body an incentive to lose fat or tap into what we had stored for later. And so I want to go over 3 ways we do that and kind of have you understand these things a little bit more in depth. Because, further along in this series, we're actually going to get into the how and the why. And so I really want you to be ready to make these changes properly. So the first way that we give the body an incentive to tap into fat stores is the calorie deficit. And you're like, I already knew that. But did you know that many people are actually sitting in a lifelong deficit. And this goes back to this idea that like everybody's overeating. No, I don't really believe this. I think many women are actually inconsistently eating. So maybe in certain periods of their lives, especially if they're binging, maybe they're overeating on certain days. But in reality of women are not overeating. They're often sitting in a very large deficit. And what does a deficit mean for those of you that don't know? Well, you have your basal metabolic rate or your BMR, which is literally the base amount of units of energy or calories you need to just literally function in a day. Remember, your heart beats and your brain thinks and your digestive system moves and your liver detoxifies and your blood pumps through your veins. All of those things require energy and calories, right? If you were just to lay there like a vegetable, that is your BMR. And then add in all of the extra fuel that's required when you actually use your body. So you get out of bed and you start walking and you walk your dog and you pick up your kids and maybe you go and exercise at the gym. Maybe you have, a conversation with your husband. Maybe you talk on the phone with your sister and you're like walking around and just talking with her. Maybe you like to get on your knees and garden for a little bit. All of those activities require energy. They require you to be fueled. You don't run on thin air. And so all of these extra calories or units of energy are going to add to that BMR, and this is going to create your maintenance calories, or just the amount of calories you need to just fuel and run your life, right? You're not in a surplus and you're not in a deficit. But a deficit would be being slightly lower than this, right? Eating slightly less than what you're using to actually encourage your body to tap in and use stored fuel that it had stored for later. Now, this is really an important point because a lot of women are like, well, I want to do that. I'm going to tap into that. And first of all, we have to remember that everybody's set body weight or healthy body weight is different. So you may determine that you want to have a little less fat on your body, but your body fights you at every step of the turn because maybe you just want to lose that like last 10 to 15 pounds. And I want you guys to remember that it's possible that the last 10 to 15 pounds is actually your healthy weight, and that's where your body wants to stay. This is not true for everybody, but some people think they're way overweight when in reality they're just actually heavier than they were in high school, and so they think they're overweight, but in reality, like, there's no amount of deficit that's going to actually push them lower, and unless their metabolic markers are going to really suffer. And the problem is that many women are going through their life really not even meeting their BMR, their basic metabolic rate, like what they need to just like lay there and function. And so what happens? Well, the body starts to actually eat itself. But before it does that, because it doesn't want to do that, it will slow everything down and slow down its use of fuel to the very bare minimum to really keep you alive. This might be why your hair stops growing or starts falling out or changes textures. It could be why you have that 2 p.m. afternoon slump and no matter how much coffee you drink, you're exhausted. It could be why your mood is so poor or you have severe brain fog and you feel like you can't think or get your words out properly. And this is why you'll possibly have an occasional binge and feel like you can't control yourself around food. And it's because your body is actually trying to conserve, but also it really, really wants you to get the fuel that you need. And the problem is as your body starts to slow everything down and conserve fuel, your BMR is going to lower. And so every time you now go over that BMR, the body has no idea when the next famine is coming, because that's what it sees this as. It sees it as a famine, and it's going to store as much of that fuel as possible for later. And where does that go? That goes into the fat cells. And these are those women that say, like, it doesn't matter what I eat. It just feels like I store it all as fat. And it's because you've gone so long in a famine or a deficit that you've never given your body a chance to feel safe enough to burn fuel as it should be burning. And so this is therefore a sluggish or a slow metabolism. And this is why oftentimes when you start eating more or you start to work on your metabolism or start to give yourself the fuel that you need, you feel like you immediately just start to store it all in your stomach. This is where everyone's like, how do I get rid of my belly fat? Like, oh, I got belly fat. And I'm like, your body's trying to create heat and fuel for those internal organs. Those are vital organs that have felt like they're not safe for so long. That's why you start to store that fat right near those vital organs. The body hasn't felt safe for a very long time. And so the minute it gets enough fuel, it's going to put some of that fuel into safety. It's just a matter of fact, because it really doesn't know the next time that famine's coming. And this is where you really need to get your mindset right and be really real about your real to yourself about where you've come from and what your body has gone through, and also how unsafe it has felt. And your job is first and foremost to create the safety and consistency it needs, and that it has been craving all along and been telling you it needs through all of its signs and symptoms. You might want to lose fat right now, but your body might not be saying that it's time yet. And that's where you really need to decide and use your metabolic markers and kind of assess like how you're feeling overall, how you're sleeping, your stress response, all of those good things, and say like, okay, I'm ready to add a little bit of extra stress on the body, because at the end of the day, fat loss is stress and requires stress to happen. So now that you understand that fat loss does require a little bit of a calorie deficit, I want you to understand that there are different ways to create a calorie deficit. And this really leads us to the second point, where there is a difference between using stress to open up fat cells. It's forcing your body to open up fat cells under duress, and actually increasing your metabolic function, so your body's need for fuel actually increases, and the body will start to tap into fat stores slowly and use what's stored inside. So there are actually two ways we burn fuel. And the first one is obviously by having a strong metabolic function, which requires adrenal hormones like cortisol and adrenaline to be balanced, and actually relies on good high thyroid functioning. And if you've taken Fully Nourished, you understand this on a little bit of a deeper level, but I talk about this in all my trainings, all my content. And the way that we assess this is by using our metabolic markers. The second way we can actually burn fuel or burn calories is by using adrenal hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which forces us to actually tap into the fat cells extremely quickly oftentimes. This first way, or using a strong metabolism to burn fuel, will look like building a very strong metabolic foundation, strength training, but not overtraining, which means regularly in a fueled state, walking, 7 to 10,000 steps a day, getting a good night's sleep, eating plenty of protein, carbs, and fats in balanced increments every 3 to 4 hours, and balancing your blood sugar, and doing that consistently. The more stressed way, or relying on adrenal hormones, will look more like fasted cardio, diets that omit complete macronutrients like low-carb diets. Intermittent fasting definitely increases adrenal hormones. A lot of times this will be done through inconsistent eating, maybe low-quality foods, including low-quality foods into the diet, and taking a lot of shortcuts in order to create fat loss quickly. This is often done through stress. The first way will usually equal very slow fat loss, usually about a pound a week, if that. So remember that if you're consistently strength training, you're building muscle, which weighs a lot more and is a lot denser than fat. And so if you are consistently in a small calorie deficit and strength training, a lot of times you'll actually not see the numbers on the scale move all that much, because you're gaining muscle while losing fat, which just automatically weighs a little bit more. So this is where like maybe using your measurements, like a soft measuring tape that you would be used for like sewing, or even your clothes would be a better indicator, or pictures can be a better indicator of how your progress is than actually using the scale. If you're going to use the scale, I highly recommend weighing yourself every morning at the same time, and then taking all 7 days and averaging them out into one weight, because then you can actually see the change over time, because the weight's going to fluctuate so much if you're strength training. The second way, losing fat using stress hormones will lead to very oftentimes fast weight loss or movement on the scale, but that won't necessarily mean it's fat loss. You can lose a lot of water from your muscle tissue, you can lose a lot of glycogen or stored carbohydrates, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're losing fat, but you'll see a lot of the numbers change quite a bit on the scale. And the problem with these things is that one requires you to build a strong foundation first, and the other is just reliant upon short-term results and not really caring about your health long term. And that really leads us to the third and final point that I want to make, is you have to build a strong foundation first for fat loss. It doesn't matter how much you weigh. You have to build a strong foundation first. What do I mean by this? Well, your metabolism is going to take a hit when you start to attempt fat loss. It just is. When you start to decrease your intake of fuel, you're going to start to feel hungry, and your hormones are going to shift a little bit, so your body starts tapping into your fat stores. As that starts to come out, that is going to be metabolically suppressive a little bit. And that's why I want to remind people that are maybe in the place where they're ready to attempt and start fat loss is, your metabolic markers are probably going to take a little bit of a hit. You might see your body temperatures go down. You might feel like your sleep's getting a little wonky. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not ready. It might just take a little bit of time to adjust. But if you don't adjust, then it might be a good indicator that you're not quite ready. But no matter how you create your deficit, whether it's by decreasing your calories a little bit, being more mindful of your macros, maybe you're getting a little bit extra protein, a little less fat. Maybe you're actually just working on increasing your metabolism while keeping everything else the same in regards to your nutrition by adding more muscle and strength training, or sleeping more, or getting more sunlight, or maybe you quit a job that you hate and you're feeling so much better. Those are all ways that you might actually increase your metabolism. But no matter how you're creating that deficit, it's going to add a little bit of stress to the system. It's going to add some stress to the liver, the digestive tract, and because you're automatically maybe eating a little less calories, you're going to be automatically eating a little less nutrients. And so it's really important that you built that strong and solid foundation first and got a lot of nutrients in. So when you maybe decrease the amount that you're eating, or your metabolism has increased and your need for those nutrients has raised, but you haven't raised those nutrients yet because you're pointedly trying to lose fat, you have that foundation to fall back on, so your body doesn't just immediately freak out and go into a stressed out fight or flight state. Because part of healing the metabolism and supporting the metabolism is just providing the cells with what they need to feel as balanced as possible and be resilient to all stressors, including the possible stress of fat loss at some point in time. A body that was allowed to feel safe for a time and given what it needed to feel safe for a time before forced into a not so safe place for a short time will be able to actually restore balance and stability a lot quicker, which literally just means keep the weight off a lot longer, much more than a body that was actually forced into an extreme famine in order to just lose fat fast. And then how do you expect yourself to find stability after that? So it's just really important to remember that the foundation that we create before we go into a deficit, or before we start adding things in to lose fat or give our body an incentive to tap into those fat stores, is everything. And it may be a good idea to create some stability and safety for 3 to 6 months if we get real with ourselves and realize we haven't had safety or stability ever, or for a very long time since maybe we were a kid. So the bottom line is health and fat loss are not actually always synonymous. Even though we've been led to believe in our society and our culture, a lot of us are told oh, you just need to lose some weight in order to get healthy. And it's not that simple actually. And a lot of us will feel like we're at a healthier place once we lose the fat. But remember, how we get there, the journey, is actually going to be everything. And sometimes it's actually worth spending the 3 to 6 months just providing the body with what it needs with no care for the outcome in order to build that strong foundation before shifting the mindset to specifically focusing on losing fat. Sometimes it's actually more appropriate to focus on balance first and then growth and change. But this is why in Fully Nourished, I really teach you guys how to create safety and create balance and be in tune with your body. But I do provide a lot of guidance in Module 5 of Fully Nourished specifically, that if you are a little bit hesitant about gaining weight during the process of switching to pro-metabolic eating, or you really don't want to gain any weight or can't afford to gain any more weight, then there are steps you can take to actually prevent or cause the least amount of fat gain in this process. It really comes down to and boils down to just being as slow and steady as possible and making the changes in a very strategic way. But there is some value to actually having some guidance as you make these shifts. And I know that as this industry becomes more and more popular, there's a lot of people that talk about this stuff for free. And of course, I provide a lot of value for free because I want you to have the opportunity to make these changes and change your health without having to purchase anything from anyone. But I think sometimes if you're feeling really lost, it can be helpful to have some guidance and have some steps and what to focus on first and prioritize first when it feels like there's all these changes that have to be made and you're not really sure how the outcome is going to be. And so that's why I created Fully Nourished. But with that being said, don't forget that, you do need to create a calorie deficit for fat loss. You can lose fat by using stress or using a strong metabolism. It's your choice. And it is always important to build a strong foundation, regardless of if you spend a couple of weeks or a couple of months doing it. But foundation first will really determine how well it sticks. But I hope this was a helpful video for you, and I'll actually see you in the next video where we're gonna talk about when it's appropriate to actually gain weight in order to lose weight and the science behind all in. See you in the next video.